Welcome everybody for this public evening talk, which is organized by the German Physical Society and is called after Max-von-Laue, the Max-von-Laue talk. My name is Götz Neuneck. I'm the chair of the working group for physics and disarmament at the German Physical Society. I'm a physicist. The German Physical Society in 2000 initiated a lecture series in honor of Max-von-Laue. This famous physicist and Nobel Prize winner was the president of the German Physical Society from 1931 to 1933, and he was extraordinarily active in the fields of human rights, opposing Adolf Hitler, the Nazis, between 1933 and 1945. He was also a close friend to Albert Einstein. These Max-von-Laue lectures are held during the annual conferences and are given by scientists who are distinguished by strong political and social commitments. Every year we had excellent talkers, speakers, presenters such as John Simon, Frank von Hippel, or Jacques Steinberger talking about important subjects in which physics had an impact on societal issues and the other way around. You all know that after developing nuclear weapons, physicists were at the forefront of alerting policymakers and the public to the dangers of nuclear war. National academies, non-governmental organizations, and individual scientists helped conceive and promote arms control concepts and develop verification technologies which formed the foundation for treaties that enhanced international security and stability. It's a pleasure to welcome the speaker of this evening, which is Professor Steve Fetter. He is a professor at the School of Public Policy since 1988 at the University of Maryland. This was the opportunity when we met first, Steve. I remember he has served as the associate provost and is now the dean of the graduate school since 2017. So an impressive academic life, but he has done more and has much more experiences. He served for 5 years in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, in the White House during the Obama administration. Until January 2017, he led the OSTP's National Security and International Affairs Division. In this time, he gathered a lot of experiences with other important governmental institutions, such as the Department of State, Department of Defense, State Department. So he's an academic who knows how politics works and what kind of influence physicists can have on societal issues. His academic experiences include also fellowships at Stanford University for international security, and he's also active in the National Academy of Science. So the title of the talk is what physicists can do to improve international security. Obviously, the question is, what is the situation of international security? What are the tools and the experiences and the demands on physicists to make contributions which can make a difference for a more peaceful world? So again, Steve, welcome. The floor is yours, and I'm sure we are quite eager to listen to you. This talk is also recorded and can be seen via YouTube. And we have not much participant for the moment, but I'm sure on YouTube this talk can, or the subject hopefully skyrockets in the future. So welcome again, Steve, and again, it's your turn.
Thank you for that introduction, Götz. It is an honor to speak in this lecture series, an honor not only because Max von Laue was a great physicist and a Nobel laureate, but because of the courage he exhibited during the Nazi period, both in his public defense of Jewish scientists such as Haber and Einstein, and in his private and secret efforts to help Jewish scientists flee Germany and assist in the survival of those unable to leave. In a short autobiographical essay, von Laue states that he tried to remain aloof from politics and to focus on physics. But he wrote, "Who remained in a position to ignore politics after 1932, when absolutely everything was pulled into a political context and evaluated politically? My urgent sense of justice was particularly violated by the lawless capriciousness of National Socialism, and my pride as a scholar was hit hard by Nazi interference in the freedom of science and of the universities." But von Laue stayed in Germany, partly because he did not want to take a position abroad that was more needed by other colleagues, and partly because he wanted to help rebuild German physics after the war ended, which he did. And even though he stayed during the war, he sent his son to the United States so he would not have to fight for Hitler. And he refused to take responsibility later for Germany's nuclear program. Last year, I was honored to receive the Leo Szilard Lectureship Award from the American Physical Society, which recognizes the use of physics for the benefit of society. And in preparing for this talk, I was delighted to discover that Szilard was a student of von Laue at the University of Berlin. And let me just start my screen sharing so that I can show you this transcript of the courses that Szilard took in the winter of 1920. And you can see that there are two by von Laue and also two by Planck, a quite impressive transcript. And in fact, von Laue was Szilard's doctoral thesis advisor. Szilard recalls that von Laue gave him a problem in relativity theory but he was unable to make any progress. So Szilard came up with his own idea in a completely unrelated field on the relationship between entropy and information. He was reluctant to take the idea directly to von Laue, so he brought it instead to Einstein. And Einstein liked the paper, which encouraged Szilard to take it to von Laue, who accepted it for the PhD degree. This and a related paper remained obscure for 30 years when they were rediscovered and became a foundation for modern information theory. Like von Laue, Szilard had deep humanitarian instincts and assisted many scientists who lost their academic positions in Germany. As a Hungarian Jew, Szilard himself fled Germany. He left a few days after the Reichstag fire on an empty train. The very next day, the train was packed with people trying to leave Germany. That train was stopped at the border and everyone was removed and interrogated. And Szilard used to say that in order to succeed, one did not have to be much more clever, only one day earlier than other people. But Szilard was often years ahead of his colleagues. For many years, I taught a course on nuclear weapons. The first required reading was The Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes. The book begins with a recounting of Szilard's epiphany in 1933, just a year after the discovery of the neutron, that a chain reaction might be possible. Szilard recalls that it suddenly occurred to me that if we could find an element which is split by neutrons and which would emit two neutrons when it absorbs one neutron, such an element, if assembled in sufficiently large mass, could sustain a nuclear chain reaction. I didn't see at the moment just how one would go about finding such an element or what experiments would be needed, but the idea never left me. In certain circumstances, it might be possible to set up a nuclear chain reaction, liberate energy on an industrial scale, and construct atomic bombs. And in fact, Szilard patented the idea of a nuclear reactor shortly thereafter. And when uranium fission was discovered 5 years later, Szilard helped draft the famous letter from Albert Einstein to President Roosevelt, warning that Germany might develop nuclear weapons. This led to the Manhattan Project, which produced the first nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons. And Szilard worked with Fermi to develop the first reactor and demonstrate a sustained chain reaction. And when the war was coming to an end in 1945, and it was clear Germany had not developed nuclear weapons, Szilard helped draft the Frank Report, which warned of an inevitable arms race and argued for the international control of nuclear weapons. Szilard alerted US political leaders to the dangers of nuclear weapons, but he was unable to persuade them to surrender the short-lived advantages of a nuclear monopoly for the longer-term gains of international control. The arms race he predicted happened just 4 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Soviet Union detonated its first fission bomb, and just 3 years later, the United States detonated the first thermonuclear bomb with a yield 1,000 times greater than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. The Soviets followed suit 3 years later with a thermonuclear weapon of their own, and both countries built enormous factories to produce nuclear weapons, which were deployed on missiles, aircraft, torpedoes, and artillery. Even nuclear landmines were fielded. By the 1960s, the United States had deployed more than 30,000 weapons with a combined yield of 20,000 megatons, or more than 1 million times the yield of the Hiroshima bomb. By the mid-1980s, the combined arsenals of the US and the Soviet Union totaled more than 60,000 weapons. And to get some idea of the magnitude of these numbers, here is what Hiroshima looked like after the detonation of a 15 kiloton nuclear weapon, which killed 125,000 people. And here is the area that would be destroyed by blast and fire if a weapon of current average yield were detonated above Washington, D.C., which is near where I live. Each of these weapons can kill 1 million people. And it's absolutely staggering to believe that we once deployed 60,000 such weapons. We survived the Cold War by some combination of prudence and good luck, probably a good measure of the latter. Political and military leaders came to understand that any nuclear attack would result in devastating retaliation, and that no potential political or military gain could justify risking the destruction of their society. And so the United States and Soviet Union were deterred not only from using nuclear weapons, but from engaging in conflicts that might lead to the use of nuclear weapons. The breakup of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union signaled the end of the Cold War and the nuclear arms race, and triggered the substantial reductions in nuclear arsenals, almost 90% compared to the Cold War peak. And you can see that rapid decline in the slide here. For the last 30 years, the focus has been on ensuring stable deterrence. But this deterrence comes at a high price. The United States and Russia each maintain about 4,000 nuclear weapons today, including 1,000 weapons that can be launched within minutes. Another 7 countries together have an additional 1,000 nuclear weapons. And we live, as we sit here today, with the constant risk that these weapons might be used by miscalculation or mistake, through the escalation of conventional conflicts, or as a result of false warnings, or by deranged leaders, officers without authorization, or terrorists who have stolen nuclear weapons or nuclear materials. And this status quo would be dangerous enough, but the status quo is being upset by both old and new factors that portend a new era of instability. The old factors are easy to see in the deteriorating political relationships between the United States and Russia and the United States and China. This, combined with US ballistic missile defense efforts, have led both Russia and China to expand and modernize their nuclear arsenals. Russia is developing a suite of new nuclear weapons, including a very large ICBM that is capable of carrying many warheads or attacking from the south, a hypersonic glide vehicle on those missiles, a high-speed nuclear-powered intercontinental torpedo, and a nuclear-powered intercontinental cruise missile. And Russia continues to deploy thousands of tactical nuclear weapons for use in a potential conflict with NATO, And its deployment of intermediate range nuclear forces directly threatens Europe and has resulted in the collapse of the INF Treaty. China is greatly expanding the number of missile silos and building many more mobile missiles. It also is deploying long-range nuclear-armed missiles at the very same bases with shorter-range conventionally armed missiles, raising the prospect that a conventional conflict could escalate to nuclear war if, for example, China uses those conventional missiles in a conflict involving Taiwan, and counterattacks are mistaken for an attempt to destroy China's nuclear forces. And the US is rebuilding its entire strategic force, a new generation of submarines, ICBMs, and bombers that will last through most of this century at a cost of more than $1 trillion. And although we are unlikely to witness a repeat of the gross excesses of the Cold War, these developments will preserve the risks of large and alert nuclear arsenals for decades to come. During the Cold War, as Götz mentioned, physicists in the United States and around the world took a leading role in warning citizens and policymakers about the risks of nuclear war. Einstein and other physicists signed the manifesto that led to the creation of the Pugwash conferences in 1957. In the United States, Leo Szilard created the Council for a Livable World in 1962, and Henry Kendall and others at MIT founded the Union of Concerned Scientists in 1969. These and other groups played a vital role in advocating for nuclear arms control agreements, such as bans on nuclear testing, and for the development of verification measures. Physicists played a leading role in explaining the shortcomings of ballistic missile defenses and how they can be readily defeated by countermeasures or increases in offensive forces. They advocated for the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which limited defense and laid the basis for a reduction in offensive forces. In the 1980s, they critiqued the Reagan administration's Strategic Defense Initiative and plans to expand nuclear forces in Europe, and advocated for the INF and START treaties. The American Physical Society itself has produced important and influential reports on missile defense. But the physics community today seems less aware of and less concerned about nuclear risks, and has been less active recently in supporting measures to reduce those risks. This led Frank von Hippel and Dick Arwin and I a few years ago to publish an article in Physics Today that noted the potential for a new nuclear arms race and called for physicists to become more educated and more involved. And this led to the creation of the Physicists Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction, which is funded and supported by the American Physical Society. A group of a dozen physicists, including myself, have been giving talks at physics departments as part of their regular physics colloquia around the United States. We together spoke at more than 50 universities last year and hope to speak at another 50 in this coming academic year. And although our focus has been on the United States, we welcome international involvement, and I encourage all of you to join the coalition. And I hope that the German Physical Society might consider creating a similar effort and that we could coordinate our efforts across the Atlantic. In addition to alerting physicists to the dangers of nuclear weapons, the coalition encourages them to advocate for specific policy actions to reduce those dangers. These include talks between the United States and Russia and between the US and China on strategic stability and reductions in nuclear arsenals, including limits on tactical weapons and a ban on nuclear-armed intermediate-range weapons. But Russia and China are unlikely to agree to reductions without limits on US missile defenses. And as we have seen, I noted earlier, the development of new types of nuclear weapons by Russia and the expansion of the Chinese nuclear arsenal are being driven by US missile defenses. And so we need dialogue to find a formula that will allow limits and reductions in both areas. The United States should also rule out the first use of nuclear weapons and declare that the sole purpose of nuclear weapons is to deter nuclear attack. This is essential to strengthen the Non-Proliferation Treaty and lay the basis for the prohibition of nuclear weapons in the long term. The United States and its allies, including Germany and other NATO countries, account for 70% of world military spending, 4 times more than all potential adversaries combined. If the United States needs nuclear weapons for any purpose other than to deter nuclear attack, what message would this send to countries that are less secure? And finally, the United States should eliminate silo-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. Because these missiles are vulnerable to attack, the US maintains them on constant alert and maintains the option to launch them on warning of a Russian attack. This forces a US president to make decisions about a nuclear response in just a few minutes and raises the possibility that missiles could be launched in response to a false warning. It makes no sense to deploy a new generation of missiles that perpetuate the need for leaders to make rapid decisions about an immediate retaliation. And I should say that we believe that Russian missiles are on a similar posture and that China may be moving to a similar posture. So with that, I am going to stop sharing slides and note that normally I would spend the rest of the talk on talking in more detail about this agenda, and I'd be happy to talk about any or all of those proposals during the question and answer period. But in the remainder of the talk, I'd like to focus on new and longer term factors that may significantly decrease stability and increase risk, but which receive less attention. And these arise out of the rapid emergence of new technologies in various domains, which is a development that some people are calling the fourth industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution was powered by water and wood and gave us the textile factory, the steam engine, and the railroad. The second was powered by coal and oil and gave us electricity, the internal combustion engine, chemical synthesis, and the mass production of tanks, ships, and planes. The third gave us nuclear power, rockets, satellites, and computers. And the fourth revolution, which is currently underway, is characterized not only by new technologies, but by dramatic advances in existing technologies that have resulted in new applications. Chief among these is the advance in microelectronics, the steady march of Moore's law, the halving of transistor size and the doubling of computer speed every 18 months, which has resulted in a million-fold increase in the last 30 years, to the point where the smartphone that we all have in our pockets is now comparable to the fastest supercomputer of the 1990s. This has also enabled spectacular advances in sensors, so that the same smartphone contains a 12-megapixel camera, several microphones, a 3-axis gyroscope, an accelerometer, a barometer, a GPS receiver, and a digital compass. And it has enabled similar advances in the storage, retrieval, and movement of massive amounts of information. These advances in microelectronics have enabled similarly consequential advances in software. These include tools to find and attack vulnerabilities in computer systems, encryption and blockchain, and virtual and augmented reality. And perhaps most especially, the enormous advances in computer speed have made possible the deep neural networks that underlie artificial intelligence and machine learning and enable speech recognition, computer vision, robots and autonomous vehicles, and synthetic media, or deep fakes. Advances in microelectronics have also enabled new manufacturing techniques, including additive manufacture, nanotechnology, microfluidics, and microreactors, and have enabled microsatellites for visual and radar imagery and communication. In fact, smartphones power the hundreds of shoebox-sized satellites produced by the company Planet, which are now imaging the Earth, the entire Earth, every day. It's contributed to the advances in biotechnology and neuroscience, including low-cost genome sequencing, synthetic biology, genome editing, neuroimaging, human-machine interfaces, and cognition enhancement. And although we are approaching the limits of Moore's law and what can be accomplished with conventional computer technology, we can now glimpse a new generation of quantum technologies, sensors, communications, and computers that will open up entirely new possibilities. Emerging technologies in each of these domains has tremendous potential for economic and social benefit. Autonomous vehicles will reduce pollution and traffic deaths while increasing leisure and productivity. Artificial intelligence may be able to prevent medical errors and improve the accuracy of diagnosis and treatment, improve the reliability of software by finding bugs in malicious code. Virtual reality will bring a wide range of experiences and learning opportunities to people everywhere, regardless of income, and reduce the need to travel. Human-machine interfaces will restore functions to the disabled. Small satellites could bring affordable internet access to people around the globe, free of state censorship. Genome editing will result in cures for terrible diseases and crops that are resistant to climate change. And quantum computers promise to solve some of the most difficult problems in physics and chemistry and lead to the development of new drugs and materials. But these emerging technologies also have a darker side and the potential to harm individuals and society. The advance in microelectronics that makes possible the smartphone has also made possible commercially available rifles with digital fire control systems that allow anyone to hit a target within a centimeter at a distance of 1,000 meters, better than an expert sniper. Image recognition technology can allow autonomous drones to search for particular individuals or critical infrastructure targets and attack them. Self-organizing swarms of autonomous vehicles might be developed to defeat conventional armies, navies, and air forces, or fight the opposing swarms of an adversary. Synthetic media can make it impossible for ordinary citizens or even experts to distinguish fact from fiction, persuading millions to believe a false narrative. Authoritarian governments can use synthetic media, ubiquitous sensors, facial recognition, and neuroscience to impose a degree of social control beyond that imagined by George Orwell, continuously monitoring the activities, and perhaps even the thoughts of citizens. Indeed, some of this may be occurring today in China. Genome editing and synthetic biology might be used to enhance the performance of a nation's soldiers or develop new bioweapons. So these new technologies will have both direct and indirect effects on international security, including nuclear security and strategic stability. Among the direct effects, continuous observation by visual and radar satellites, combined with machine learning to recognize and track targets, could make mobile missiles vulnerable to attack. Quantum sensors and underwater autonomous vehicles could make submarines vulnerable. Cyber weapons could threaten nuclear command, control, and communication systems. Precision weapons, which might one day use quantum sensors for inertial navigation, could make effective conventional attacks possible against strategic nuclear targets, such as hardened missile silos. Advances in microelectronics and satellite sensors might significantly improve missile defense, particularly against countermeasures. Any of these developments could make nuclear weapon states less willing to reduce the number or readiness of their nuclear forces. Now, not all of the effects will be negative. Advances in satellite and sensor technology will make it possible to replace the small number of large billion-dollar communication and early warning satellites that are currently in geosynchronous orbit with large constellations of small satellites in low Earth orbit, which would be far more resilient and less vulnerable to attack. The indirect effects of emerging technologies are more difficult to foresee. Emerging technologies, particularly cyber, artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics, will change the nature of warfare, and that will change the balance of power between large and small states and between states and subnational groups and even individuals. This could make countries more reliant on nuclear weapons and lower the threshold for nuclear use. In fact, the Trump administration changed US policy to allow for the use of nuclear weapons in response to significant non-nuclear attacks, including attacks on infrastructure. And that raises the prospect that nuclear weapons states might rely on the threat of nuclear attack to deter or respond to cyber or robotic attacks on critical infrastructure. At the very same time that states might begin planning on early cyber or robotic attacks to cripple an adversary's military capability at the start of a conflict. Though it's easy to see the potential for miscalculation. Niels Bohr famously said, "Prediction is very difficult, especially about the future." But Leo Szilard showed that prediction is not only possible, but essential. It's vital to anticipate what scientific and technological discoveries may lurk around the corner, consider what the possible consequences of these developments may be for society, and identify steps to minimize the negative impacts while maximizing the positive. Unlike nuclear fission, it may be difficult to foresee all of the consequences of today's many emerging technologies. Will they benefit the West or the East? Make aggression easier or more difficult? Make us more or less secure? Some speculate that the United States or China will become dominant in artificial intelligence or quantum computing, and will move quickly to capture enduring military, political, and economic benefits from this dominance. Others believe emerging technologies will diffuse rapidly through commercial channels and will empower smaller states and subnational groups. Prediction's difficult, but we should not leave the field to science fiction writers. We should engage scientists, particularly physicists, in a systematic effort to understand what applications of emerging technologies are likely to be possible, what the societal consequences might be, and what steps can and should be taken to ensure that the benefits for society are maximized and the risks are minimized. And in doing so, we must recognize a fundamental difference in the nature of the emerging technologies. The technologies of the 20th century, nuclear weapons, manned aircraft and cruise missiles, ballistic missiles and rockets, supercomputers and large satellites, they required the resources of a large nation state. The important discoveries and developments were made by scientists with government funding, often in government laboratories, which allowed government to control the flow of information and slow the diffusion of technology to other countries. The fact that these technologies were being developed by government, often in classified environments, allowed government to recruit the best and brightest scientists and engineers who were attracted by the opportunity to work on problems that were at the cutting edge of science and technology. In contrast, the emerging technologies of the 21st century are being developed largely by private firms, motivated largely or entirely by commercial applications, without government funding or involvement. This creates special challenges because multinational firms have enormous economic power and can move operations to another country if faced with government regulation. The technologies they are developing and deploying have a product cycle measured in months rather than years, and are evolving often too rapidly for government to keep pace. Top graduates are choosing to work for Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Tesla, and SpaceX, rather than for Los Alamos, intelligence agencies, or NASA. What would a systematic effort to assess emerging technologies look like? Well, first, I think we need to increase the capacity of government to stay at the forefront of science and technology, to understand new technologies and assess the potential for misuse and consider ways to mitigate those risks. The Obama administration created programs to do this, such as the US Digital Service and the Presidential Innovation Fellows, which added to existing fellowship and other programs to attract scientific talent into government, such as the Science Fellows programs managed by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which each year bring more than 150 new PhDs into government. Germany and other European nations might consider similar programs. Governments also should make greater use of independent scientific advisory bodies. In the United States, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine and the Jason Defense Advisory Group play a vital role in providing advice by top scientists. And scientific societies like the American Physical Society also have made important contributions. Because the pace of change is so rapid, we can no longer afford to be reactive. We must anticipate future developments and the potential for misuse, and to include this sort of thinking in the training of scientists and engineers so that they view it as a professional obligation and as a civic duty. Universities should embrace this thinking and encourage their faculty and doctoral students to consider the societal implications of their research, and to reward faculty who make significant contributions to understanding and addressing the societal impacts of emerging science and technology. So in short, I think we need more people like Leo Szilard. Perhaps the most important thing we can do to improve international security is to encourage and support and nurture physicists to explore and understand the impacts of new science and technology. And with that, I will thank you for your attention, and I hope we have can continue exploring this in the questions and the answer period. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for this marvelous and very comprehensive view, starting from Szilard and Max-von-Laue as very dedicated and honest people on these kind of issues who made a difference, especially in the 60s and later on arms control and bringing in expertise to all these fields, but also raising the actual problems in a situation where treaties are discarded and the international climate is changing, so that several people are specialist physicists speaking about a new arms race, as the Frank report has done in the 50s, in the 40s, and then the 50s. So at the end, you were raising the problem of emerging technologies to maximize the benefits and to minimize the risks, which are numerous and especially can become very dangerous if they are connected to the nuclear weapon question. But that beyond that, there are other quite important, there's an important need and demand for bringing in scientific knowledge into fields of emerging technologies. You mentioned a list of things where physicists are working on: quantum technologies, artificial intelligence, and other very important fields, which have to be taken seriously. And obviously there's a gap between the power of progress and the next wave of the fourth industrial revolution and the political awareness how to deal with all these issues. So thank you very much. I found it quite impressive to start this kind of tour d'horizon, and we can continue by raising Q's and A's. We are not a large round of people here. Normally at the Max-von-Laue lectures, the lecture hall is full. Under this restricted situation now, there are not so many people left, but I saw the list of participants, and under them the president of the German Physics Society and other very committed people. So sometimes it's not the numbers, but these are the people who are dedicated to these issues. So do we have questions already in the chat? Otherwise, I can raise the first question so others have the chance to think about it more in detail. I think physicists are quite good in problem solving, and they very often are the first, or scientists as such are the first who can see the dangerous developments. Unfortunately, sometimes the pressure in the labs, in the industry is so big that many have not the time really to think about the implications of their work. So how would you characterize the current situation, maybe in the United States, but also all over Europe? How to really activate more people for thinking beyond their daily work. And younger people might be committed, but they have to make their PhD, they have to find a job. If the people are getting older, the time pressure is not decreasing, but increasing. So I think is it an individual problem, or is it an institutional problem to activate more scientists on this? And the floor is yours. I'm sure there are other questions in a row after you gave the first answer.
Well, thank you, Götz. And I can speak to the situation here at the University of Maryland, where it is correct that most physics faculty and most physics students are focused on their research, on getting their degrees, on publishing papers, getting grants and contracts. But there are students and faculty who want to work on these problems and who are really seized with the importance of making a contribution, making sure that public policy is informed by physics. And so I think it's important to give students and faculty the space and permission to do that. And that can be done by having physics colloquia occasionally, 1 or 2 talks a semester or a year on topics like this. At Maryland, we have several physics faculty who have been engaged in public policy over the years. People like Roland Sagdaev, who was a science advisor to President Gorbachev in the Soviet Union, but who joined our faculty later, and several others who have been engaged, who have sometimes taken leave to work in government, and we offer a course, or they offer a course together. So Jim Gates, who is the incoming president of the American Physical Society, and Rosina Bierbaum, for example, who served on in the White House and on the President's Council of Advisors of Technology. They offer a course that is open to physics students, graduate students, and about the science policy process and how people with a background in science and technology at the graduate level can contribute to public policy. And perhaps only 20 or 25 students from physics and the other natural sciences will enroll in that course, but I think that is a great start. And every year I have students who come to me, they often because they went to their advisor and they said, I've decided that I would rather have a career in government rather than a career in the lab. And can you point me in the right direction? And those faculty often send their students to me, and I can talk about the opportunities to do a fellowship year with the AAAS, with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, to spend a year or two working for a congressional committee or working for a government agency. And that can really launch their career, and it can help build the capacity of government to do what I was calling for in, keeping government, in making sure the best scientific information and analysis is brought to bear on the important policy problems of the day, not just in nuclear weapons, but in energy, in healthcare, in cybersecurity, and in many other areas.
Okay, thank you. So that obviously means that these special skills in this field starts at the university, and that also institutions can give and create opportunities to improve the awareness in institutions, but also get better experiences from scientific studies in other organizations. I see now the list of Q&As, and there's a very concrete question at the top. To what extent will Germany, and this is very concrete, loses its expertise to assess latest developments in nuclear armament given the discontinuation of nuclear power?
Well, just speaking personally, I thought that the decision by the German government to phase out nuclear power was not the right decision. I am very concerned about climate change and the need to completely phase out the use of fossil fuels and end the emissions of carbon dioxide. And nuclear power is one of a small number of energy sources that we have that can help us make that transition. And the other sources, wind and solar, have great potential, but are intermittent, and we have currently no good way of storing energy or transmitting energy long distances except for nuclear power. And so, just speaking personally, I think that nuclear can play an important role in making this transition. But that said, there were people in the United States who argued that the United States had to have the whole range of nuclear power technologies, not just reactors, but enrichment and reprocessing, plutonium reprocessing, in order to play an important role in security discussions. And I don't think that is the case. I think that the United States, Germany, obviously have very sophisticated scientific and technological enterprises. And we can play an important role in assessing nuclear technologies regardless of whether we have that particular technology in our country. It's really more about the economic aspect of it. Having the technology yourself and exporting it allows one to play maybe a more important role in the safeguards that are placed on the technology, but not necessarily the assessment of that technology.
Mm-hmm. Let me add here that there are countries who do not phase out nuclear energy and which are not inclined to push forward nuclear disarmament at all. So there's also the other coin of this in this currency here. Several people thanked you for your excellent talk, under them the president of the German Physical Society and also the Secretary General of the German Physical Society. There are also questions: to which extent are the potential detrimental effects of quantum technology, biotechnology, robotics investigated in terms of the international as well as the personal implications. But I just learned that this person can also raise the questions personally. Is that correct? Is that the question can also be put directly?
Yeah, if the people are here in Zoom, they can put it directly.
Okay, so then we have here also the question about on which level can significant process reach in disarmament be boosted in the UN bilaterally and in academics?
Well, on the first question, I would say, is there sufficient exploration of the impacts of these technologies? I would say the answer is no. And at the end of the Obama administration, we, really became aware of the need to have a more focused exploration of the security impacts of many of these emerging technologies, including biotechnology and synthetic biology genome editing. And we prepared a transition document for the next administration, which we, of course, thought probably would be the Clinton administration, the Hillary Clinton administration, advocating for the creation of an office that would be staffed with people who could do this. That never came to pass. I hope that the Biden administration is seeing how clearly how important these emerging technologies are and how important it is to be assessing, to have an effort, a dedicated effort to assess the potential security implications. Now, I would say that some people don't want to do it. So when we began to do this for genome editing, there was significant resistance because there was fear that this new technology, which had great promise, would be stigmatized. That if there was engagement by people, say from the security field, from intelligence agencies, that it would stigmatize this new technology, that people would, become concerned and would place restrictions on it that would inhibit the promising developments. And I think one has to be aware of that, but that can't prevent you from really trying to anticipate how genome editing could be misused or any other technology could be misused.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's another question. Would you say it is more beneficial to join a secret service or politics when trying to improve international security as a physicist? So this would be a job announcement, perhaps?
I think we need everyone in all capacities. I have personally had the privilege to work in government in several different capacities. And I have seen personally how important it is to have scientists in policy positions who really understand the basic science. That can really be vital, not to leave the field entirely to people who have training in law or political science or economics, and they often dominate policymaking. So I think it really is important, I would say essential, to have people with a background in physics and other sciences working inside government, including in positions that aren't restricted entirely to research and development or to science. But I also think it is equally important to have people outside working in scientific societies. As I mentioned, the American Physical Society is very engaged in policy and does studies in organizations like our National Academy of Sciences, in non-governmental organizations like the ones I mentioned before, like the Union of Concerned Scientists or the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and also in universities. We have in the United States many university groups at MIT, Princeton, Stanford, who are focused on analyzing, doing technical analyses of important policy issues. So just recently, for example, we had there was a great article published on hypersonic weapons jointly between a scientist working at MIT and at the Union of Concerned Scientists that showed quite nicely what were that many of the claims that were being made by advocates of these weapons were false, and that the security implications were really much more modest than was being claimed. And often we have to rely on independent scientists working at a non-governmental agency or at a university to do analysis that won't be done by a government agency. So I think it's hard to say where any individual person can have a greater impact and a greater benefit. I would just say we need everyone working from all directions.
Although one has to add that the working environment in science is very different from the working environment of intelligence services.
Yes, that is certainly true. I have been grateful to sort of have an experience in both worlds. And as you can see, I enjoy coming back to my university office after having been in government service for a few years.
Okay, then I have a question which is also quite interesting about the imbalance imbalance between scientific advice and military departments in the sense of funding. So the question is, politicians can be quite resilient to scientific councils. Without the immediate threat of nuclear devastation, how can a few physicists prevail against well-funded military departments?
Yes. It is a challenge, I will admit, and I think you can clearly see this in the area of ballistic missile defense, where the United States continues to spend $10 billion or more per year on developing missile defense systems, which have been shown by independent analysis not to be very effective. It's certainly the case that this military spending, high level of military spending, is also influential politically, not just in Pentagon budgets, but in the money that is flowing to defense contractors that then support the political campaigns of politicians. And so one just has to hope that fact and analysis can win out in the end, and that reality will eventually assert itself. So, for example, in the case of missile defense, it simply is the case that it is extremely difficult to tell the difference between a warhead and a balloon or another countermeasure in the vacuum of space. This is a fact of physics. It is a fact that physicists can easily understand and explain what the huge physical challenges are in making a system that can be effective under those circumstances against an adversary who is intelligent and who may deploy countermeasures that you didn't observe before. And I hope that if we have enough people, particularly enough physicists and scientists working on this and making this clear to the policymakers and politicians that are making the decisions, that we can prevail. I'm not saying it's easy, but that is the hope.
Mm-hmm. Okay, there are some questions in the chat which you can see. So if you pop that up, maybe you can answer a question. There's also another question by Dr. Rico Friedrich. So if there's a chance to let him in from the visitors room to the screen, I would be very happy about that. If this works, Dr. Rico Friedrich would like to raise a question. Is he there? Not yet, so he might have the chance. Sorry?
I can see the question in the Q&A about estimate the ability of current political leaders to estimate and mitigate the emerging risks compared to the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And well, that is hard to make a direct comparison. I think most people believe the Cuban Missile Crisis is the time that we came the closest to nuclear war. And if you read accounts of the time, there were a series of incidents that easily could have led to mistakes. Shoot downs of U-2 planes, the dropping of depth charges near Russian submarines that were armed with nuclear weapons and had the physical ability to launch nuclear weapons, contemplating attacks against Cuban and Russian Soviet troops in Cuba that almost certainly would have led to the use of nuclear weapons. So that was an extremely dangerous time. And fortunately, I don't think we are in anything close to that situation today. But I do worry about these emerging technologies and the ability of those to create situations that might increase the risks of miscalculation. I think for the last 30 years, the situation has been fairly stable. I do, in particular, worry about an unstable leader like the former president of the United States. And I'm not saying that just for me. I'm saying that for the reports of The widespread reports that the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, was extremely concerned. The chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, General Milley, was so concerned about the potential for a unstable president to order a nuclear attack, that this was a discussion at the highest levels. And I think we do need to take measures to ensure that that cannot happen, that an unstable president cannot order the use of nuclear weapons first, which is one of the reasons why I think it's so important for the United States to commit that it would never order the first use of nuclear weapons.
So we have now 1 hour, but we have still 2 questions remaining. So you can find them in the chat as well and the Q&A tool. The first question is from Alexander Balatsky, who asks about perception, which is that the work on security studies is very often directly related to the governmental security apparatus. This is somewhat some kind of perception that this happens. But I think we have to differentiate here about which country we are talking about. That seems to me at least one very, very first answer. But you are the person who you should answer about the distance, the independence between academic studies and direct relations to governmental security bodies.
Well, we are fortunate in the United States to have groups at universities, non-governmental organizations, scientific societies, the national academies, who are completely independent of government and who can give advice that I think people have confidence is independent from government or from security agencies. I'm not sure that is the case in all countries, and I think that is to the detriment of other countries being able to make the best decisions. That I think it's vital to have independent scientific advice, and that mechanisms, governments, it's in their own interest to establish mechanisms to make that possible.
But I think it's an eternal challenge for scientists in general, how independent they are. So it's not only a security-related question. The last question here is from João Pedro dos Santos Pires. In your opinion, do you believe that government awareness on scientific ideas is keeping up with the ever more important role that science and technology is playing in society nowadays? So it's a central question, and maybe a last comment on this would a great closing argument for our public evening session.
Yes, well, thank you. It has been a pleasure to be in this session, and I would say that the answer here is, I think clearly no. Clearly no, in the United States, government is not keeping up with the pace of scientific and technological change. I saw that clearly myself when, during my time in the White House, there was a particular case involving encryption. You might remember this. It was in the news that the FBI wanted to decrypt the information that was on a particular cell phone, and it wanted to create a backdoor. It wanted Apple to create a backdoor so that government agencies could access. And I think the FBI did not have the technical expertise to really understand what it was asking for and why that was either not possible, or if it was made possible, would create a backdoor through which anyone could enter, through which hackers could enter and cause great mischief. And so I think that was an illustration of where government did not have the scientific and technological expertise that was needed to make the right decisions, to try to adopt the right policy on a very important question.
Okay, thank you, Steve, for investing this time to talk to us. I'm quite sure that you touched on an important subject and that we will have further discussions about that in the DPG committees. We are aware on many of these things. We benefited very much about your political as well as academic experience and assessment of the current situation. And I'm sure that others will listen to this video here simply because the subject will not go away. On the contrary, there are more and more problems here. So I'm sure that you made a wonderful contribution to this discussion. We will pick up several of these issues, and the most important challenge is to implement some of these ideas and some of these experiences you just presented. So have a nice evening. Thank you very much. Many greetings to all of us who I cannot see, unfortunately, but others can see us talking about a very important subject. And I'm sure we will have a next Max-von-Laue-Lecture at the next DPG annual conference, which will also deal with societal issues and the impact of science and technology on societies. Thank you very much and have a nice evening all together.
Thank you.